welcome back to another episode of Black Tea, y'all. This is the podcast that is all about Black women in advertising, presented to you by Muse by Cleo. As usual, I'm your host, Michelle Lawrence. Super excited today to be here with a friend of mine, Taylor Brodie. Hey, Taylor.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me, Michelle.
Thank you for coming on. Please tell people what you do and where you're based.
I am a senior strategist in advertising. I'm in Brooklyn, New York. I also am a content creator.
How did you get into advertising?
Long story short, through MAPE. The short version is I was on a homecoming court at Mizzou, my junior year or so. I was doing something in the craft studio. Mm-hmm. My friend at the time, TJ, he walked by, he was like, hey, have you heard of this MAPE program? I was like, no, not at all. Researched it, thought it was interesting, applied. That's the short version.
Yeah, shout out to MAPE. We love those programs that bring more color into this industry for sure. We know that, being in advertising is not easy for Black women. What would you say to encourage a younger or a more inexperienced Black woman in advertising who may be struggling with that imposter syndrome?
Oh, I love this question, and it changes every time I answer it. As a person who is constantly recovering from imposter syndrome, I think as of last year, we kind of nipped it in the butt. I would say imposter syndrome happens. It's a normal thing, and it's probably expected that you feel that way, given the world we live in. It's intentional. And the second thing is, don't let your imposter syndrome silence you. Rather, let it lead you to ask questions with someone you trust, whether they're in advertising or on your team or not. The other thing is, be mindful of what your imposter syndrome could turn into, because it could turn into anger, or it could turn into resentment, or it could turn into you having a bit of a chip on your shoulder. And we don't need, obviously as Black women and Black people in advertising, we have to work harder, be smarter, this, that, and the third, and show up as our best selves per usual. But sometimes if you have that thought of comparison or not being good enough, it can take up way more space than it needs to in those settings. So find people that you really trust and connect with, even if they're not in your industry.
I love that. Let it lead you to ask questions of people that you trust. I think that's beautiful advice. And I wish that I would have had that advice too when starting out. I think that's so invaluable. So how do you think your unique POV as a Black woman, just in life, influences the way that you show up for the work in this industry?
That's a good question. The first way that comes to mind, which was kind of rooted in anxiety, was as a strategist, our job is basically to bring new ideas to the table that people haven't considered, in a way, right? And for a long time, even to this day, my experience I always come with the facts to back up my point. You know what I mean? Me being an empathetic, emotional person, I'm like, oh my God, this insight is rooted in feeling and culture and everything that we're seeing and feeling around us. And it's I know it's true. Duh. We are culture. We make it, we create it, and we live in it. But sometimes people may have a hard time receiving that if it's the first time that they're considering this perspective. So if I have a brief or an insight or a POV, there's always a part of me that's have the facts, whatever those facts may look like, just in case. I think the other part of it, just being a Black woman in advertising, is we naturally are observant in a different way in the world, I believe, because we have to be. And I think that makes me a bit more insightful. And I personally, I don't show or, send or consider something an insight if I don't get a feeling from it. It needs to have some kind of punch to it. That makes people kind of reconsider the problem they're solving, or make them want to learn more and ask more questions to solve that problem in an effective way. That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you're also a content creator. What inspires you to make content? What are you making content about? Why are you making content?
I love that you asked imposter syndrome at the beginning of this, because my page, The Meme Queen, or my TikTok, the whole purpose behind it is that I believe memes are the easiest language to understand, so you might as well use them for good. And as a person who was dealing with imposter syndrome for a long time, in my professional career, I felt like making content was the one space that I could just create and do and say what I wanted. And there was no brief I had to align with other than my own. But the two quote content pillars of the channel are entertainment and empowerment. The whole purpose is to use meme culture as a vessel to empower people and to kind of primarily Black women. TikTok channel, and then there's also I have the Instagram that we are, progressing with in real time. But yeah, so the purpose there is to empower and entertain. And I just love the blend of like humor because it brings your wall, it kind of breaks your guard down a bit. And then the empower element obviously is something that we all need. And it doesn't matter what day of the week it is. I think there's huge value there. So
yeah, just that ability to express off brief, like you said, I think is something that's so important. And I think that in and of itself can be a form of activism for our people. It's just, not having just the expression of joy out loud for other people to see, us existing or not see us existing. And I think that that's something that I think is just so enriching and is such an important part of our survival and our thriving as a culture. So love that. More joy in the world.
Eat it.
Entertainment and empowerment. I'm here for it. You also dance a little bit. Is that for fitness? Is that for craft? What was that about?
Yeah, a little bit of both. Well, more so fitness because your girlies, we're all, we want to be snatched if possible. But personally, like gyms give me a bit of anxiety. And I danced when I was a kid, and then I danced a little bit more when I was in college. And I came to the realization that if it is not rooted in dance, then I'm probably not going to stick with it. But I have also just been on a journey of like creativity the last few years and getting reconnected with that. Meme Queen is a part of that. Dance is a part of that. Other elements of art. So yeah, I love it because it keeps me happy, keeps me, moving. And I think you need to have movement to stay sane in our time. So.
What are you dancing to? What do you like to dance to right now?
Unless you're dancing too. So Mondays, I go to Mark Morris Dance Group. They have classes for like $18 or so. And they do hip hop classes on Monday. And it's not like Bob's Burgers, that's hip hop. It's not one of those. Like there's a woman named Leia who's phenomenal, and she tends to dance to like the 2000s genre of like pop and hip hop, which we all love and have nostalgia for. So I do those. And then on Thursday, I do Zumba, which has advanced in the last couple of years. Because when I took my first class, I'm like, this is a cardio class with a suggestion of Zumba.
Yes. Very little dance to it. It's very, yeah. So I'm glad to hear it's progressed since then.
Oh yeah, it's intense, but it's so fun. And when you have an instructor, her name is Bettina, she's very passionate about different types of dance, like samba and salsa, and she's amazing. So mental health, yes.
I was gonna say, and you could also say that infuses your work as a strategist, like tapping into different cultures in different ways and just getting those different life experiences that you can then bring to the table in your work.
100%. Absolutely.
Cool. What is a career goal that you want to manifest and put out into the world that maybe you haven't achieved just yet, but it's on your radar? What's next for you?
I'm trying to think about which goal because they do change often, but I feel like a constant goal of mine is to know that I'm creating valuable and trustworthy relationships with clients as well as my team, and feeling like a true leader in the work that I'm doing, and feeling like I am thoroughly taking up space as Taylor, as a strategist, as me in the way that I approach strategy. So basically taking up space, being a leader, and ensuring that I'm fostering sufficient and trustworthy relationships. And if that leads to an award, gorgeous. But if not, okay.
I was gonna say, I love that your goals are position agnostic. Because that's something that you have full control over, is whether or not you feel like you are leading in your work. That is something that you completely have ownership over. So I love that. I think that's such a beautiful, tangible goal. I work really closely with, the people who report to me, and I'm always checking in with them on their goals. Is this goal still relevant for you? Is it serving you? Have you made progress? What can we do to make it actionable? And I think something like having, bringing a leadership presence to the work that I do is something that is such a beautiful, like, ownable way of making sure that you're growing. So I think that's great. Is there a challenge maybe a challenge or a moment of impact that I'll say that you have had to deal with in this advertising industry that felt like it was somehow connected to or stemming from your identity as a Black woman? And if so, how did you handle it? And would you handle it the same way today?
I just remember I was still very new in advertising, and there was a coworker who from my understanding, she was trying to like bond with me. And this particular coworker was higher up in leadership. And I just kind of noticed over time, there were things that would be said in attempt to bond, but they felt very like stereotypical. And it just kind of made me uncomfortable over, a couple months. And back then I was still so fresh into the industry that, I'm not thinking about the politics. So I'm like, I need to have a conversation with this person. Just to let them know that like what they're saying is really just not hitting. Because there was one comment she made, and it was like the fifth time something had happened. And she made a comment about like tanning and skin color and like, oh my God, like I just wish I tanned better. And I was like, oh. And yeah. And so I basically had a conversation with this person, and they did show some tears. And I was like, why are we doing that? But I remember having the conversation with them, and they I could tell it hurt their ego because they didn't realize, but I was proud that I did it. There was no, to my understanding, consequence afterward. But when I look back and I realized like, girl, you sat down a person of this position that made you uncomfortable because they were making inappropriate comments about, your Blackness unintentionally, but they were still doing it. I'm like, that's kind of wild. But yeah, I didn't necessarily realize how, so let me get back to your part of your question. Is there anything that I would change today? Honestly, no. And I think if I would continue to be as straightforward as I was, but also be mindful of, sorry, I'm really struggling to answer this question, but just being mindful of like, no, if it feels off and it makes you uncomfortable, it doesn't matter what their position is. Like sometimes people don't realize what they say and how it impacts others. Some people should know, but it doesn't mean everyone does. So you got to speak up.
Yeah, I mean, that is wild. And it's wild for that reason that you just said. I think that we tell ourselves that I need to be at this level, or I need to be, equal to or above the person wronging me before I can say something about it. And I don't think that's a helpful voice. So I think it's amazing that you, even being more junior in your career, were like, foul. Yeah. Like, I'm gonna just tell you this right now. I think that's something that a lot of us, I know I wasn't, we're not bold enough to say. So yeah, don't go back and change that. Like that's
we're not changing that.
Like, I think that that's beautiful, having that confidence from day one. Where do you feel like you get that confidence from?
Oh, thank you. I think it's so funny to look back on. I'm like, girl, go ahead. I have this my best friend knows this. Sometimes when I talk about like my goals in my future, I'm like, oh, or years ago when I would talk about me in the future, I would consider like, oh, Big Tay. Like that's kind of how I would, wrap my future self in a rapper. And now I'm like, oh no, Big Tay kind of existed back then too, just different ways. But yeah, I agree.
I love that. I love Big Tay. Amazing. Well, there's a question that I like to ask everybody before I get you out of here. Are there any Black-owned companies or products that you are really loving right now?
Yes, I'm actually wearing one, and it's a beautiful cut off denim jacket that is just gorgeous, and I live for it. The brand name is Africa Origins, and he's a designer, and he creates a bunch of different denim looks, from pants, jeans, jackets, shirts, hats, and it's kind of like wearable art.
Yeah.
And I've been, as you can see, this has a million different colors and patches.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it's like a nice statement piece. And I think being in New York and just discovering elements of yourself, it's beautiful when you can find a statement piece that resonates, and you grow with that piece of clothing. So Africa Origins for sure.
Okay, cool.
Africa with a K on the Instagram, by the way.
Well, Taylor Brodie, thank you so much for coming on Black Tea. I have really enjoyed hearing about your story, hearing about Lil Tay, hearing about Big Tay. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It was amazing, and continue to thrive with this podcast. You're doing amazing things and you're asking important questions. So proud of you for that.
Oh, thank you so much. To everybody out there watching, please continue to watch Black Tea. Catch up on all the other episodes at musebycleo.com/Black Tea and let us know how you're feeling. Follow us on Instagram if you're not already doing that at Sip Black Tea. And with that said, that'll do it for this episode. Thank you so much. Bye.